do you so affirm?
Yes, sir.
State your name for the record.
I'm Lieutenant William Powell.
With the Henry County Police Department.
Yes, sir.
And I have questions for you. Proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Lieutenant Powell, were you present back at Highway 81, the incident date that we were talking about here?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you have an opportunity to view that video?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Okay. And you did not write a report that day? Is that correct? Okay. When you went out to the scene, do you recall there on Highway 81, were you kind of one of the later officers that came, or were you there from the very beginning?
No, ma'am. I was one of the later supervisors that came.
Okay. And when you got there, do you recall, have you had an opportunity to view that body-worn camera that was Officer Phillips?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And in speaking to him, or in viewing that video, did you have an opportunity to see that you were speaking to Officer Phillips, kind of getting an update as to what was going on at the scene?
Yes, ma'am. I was actually on the phone, and I was providing the names of the individuals that were on the scene.
Okay. And did you have any, other than being in their proximity, did you have any direct contact or direct questioning or anything like that of Matthew Baker?
No, ma'am. Once I obtained the names, I returned to my vehicle and assisted with traffic until we could break away and open the roadway back up.
Okay. And do you recall, did you go into the house?
No, ma'am, I did not.
You said you were on the phone relaying that information.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you recall who you were on the phone with?
In accuracy, I do not. I would assume that it was either going to be one of the command staff and or one of the detectives, but I honestly don't remember.
Okay. Okay. And the fact that you don't know, does that change your testimony in any way that what we saw in the video was your limited proximity and contact with Matthew Baker?
Yes.
That's all the questions I have, Judge.
Calls.
You are a major?
No, currently lieutenant. At the time, I was a sergeant.
Okay, at the time you were a surgeon, but you are a colonel then?
Lieutenant.
Lieutenant now.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
apologize. I apologize.
No, it's okay.
Lieutenant Powell, I wanted to make sure I used the right title. In 2016, were you assigned a body camera?
No, ma'am.
Did you wear a personal body camera that you had?
I did not.
In the video, you're wearing a jacket that has maybe like a fleece jacket. Is that right?
That's correct.
And in the center of your chest in the video, there is a device. What is that device?
It is the microphone that goes with my radio. I fed it through and actually just had it attached to my lapel.
Understood. When you arrived, did you arrive in a marked or unmarked patrol car?
It was a marked patrol car.
A marked patrol car. Was that vehicle at the time equipped with a dash cam?
It was not.
Okay. And you didn't have any of your own dash cam type device, right?
I did not know.
Okay. Did you handcuff or unhandcuff any of the individuals at the scene?
I did not.
And you didn't make a report. You didn't write a report in this
That's correct.
case, right?
That's correct.
I'm going to have just one moment. I don't have any further questions. Thank you, sir.
He stepped down.
Yes, Your
All
Honor.
right,
Thank
he
you.
stepped down. Thank you. Next.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, at this time, the state calls Lieutenant David Gagnon.
All right, you can take your mask off. Raise your right hand. Solemnly swear the evidence you're about to give in the matter pending before this court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God, and you so affirm.
I did.
All right, have a seat. Take your name for the record.
David Gagnon
And by whom were you employed?
with the Henry County Police Department.
And your title is?
I'm a lieutenant.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Lieutenant Gagnon, you recall back in October of 2016, on the 27th, the morning of that day, reporting to a home over on Highway 81, I think it was 81 East? Yes, 81 East?
I do.
Okay. And do you recall going into that home?
I do.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about when you got there. Have you had an opportunity to watch the body-worn camera that Officer Phillips had?
Yes.
Okay, and based on that video, is it safe to say that you arrived a little bit after other officers arrived?
That's correct.
Okay, so you did not have anything to do with the initial detaining of anyone there at the scene, is that correct?
That's correct.
Once you got to the scene, were you one of the officers that went into the house looking for Jacob Kosky?
That's correct.
And when you got into the house, did you locate Jacob Kosky?
No, we did not.
Was there any issue with a dog in the house?
Yes, there was a dog in the garage area.
And at any point was Matthew Baker, did he come into the house to remove the dog from the garage area so that you could check the house?
He did, yes.
And other than that, proximity to Matthew Baker when he was in the house moving the dog, did you have any other contact directly with Matthew Baker that day?
No, I did not.
Did you have anything to do with cuffing him or uncuffing him?
No, I did not.
Do you recall, folks, at the end after you had all cleared the house and did not find Jacob Kosky, do you recall anyone who had been detained being uncuffed and no longer detained?
Only thing I recall is just from the video that I saw when I saw the individuals that were uncuffed on the outside when I was
Gotcha.
watching the video.
So that refreshed your recollection, but you don't have an independent recollection of seeing anybody being uncuffed. You just know that they were uncuffed.
Right.
Okay. After you assisted in clearing the home, did not find Jacob Kosky, do you recall how much longer you stayed there at the house?
It was just a few minutes.
And then did you, to your recollection, did you talk to anybody there at the scene other than when you were in the house and people were talking about getting the dog, moved?
No, I did not. Other officers, yes, when we were clearing the house, but as to any other parties, no.
That's all the questions I have here.
Ross?
Yes, Judge. I don't have too many questions. Sir, do you remember how you were armed that day?
I had an AR-15.
Okay.
Long rifle.
And that's a rifle, right?
Correct.
Okay. If I may. I'm going to briefly show you a clip from that body cam. If I could just have one moment here. So while I'm setting this up, I want to ask you this question. While you were in the home, you were in what's called a stack up, right?
Yes, we entered the house in a stack with a ballistic shield.
And you weren't the one with the shield, right? You were.
I was in the rear.
You were in the rear. At any time when you were in the house, were you giving directions or instructions to Mr. Baker?
No.
And sir, are you able to see the screen that is behind you?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to show you. We are looking at one more moment here. I want to make sure I show you the right. The officer, let me back up here. I think this is probably, now you just saw, timestamp was around 10:13 in the morning. And what we have here is a view down Highway 81, correct?
Correct.
And there's an officer, at this point who's back to the camera, correct?
Yes.
Sir, is that you?
It is.
Okay. So you did not at any point cuff or uncuff anybody at the scene, right?
That's correct.
And you did not have conversations with Mr. Baker,
I did not.
Mr. Williams,
I did not.
Ms. Head,
I did not.
or Ms. Knight, right?
That's correct.
Now, I think that we get a pretty good picture of you here, but in 2016, were you wearing a body cam?
No.
And did you arrive in a marked or unmarked patrol car?
Mark B.
And in 2016, did your marked patrol car have a dash cam?
Yes, it did, actually.
In 2016, it did. And what would have happened to the video from that patrol car?
Well, I do know that our, at that time, we were using WatchGuard video systems, and it was hacked somehow.
Okay.
And we lost a lot of all the parking stuff, and we went to a different camera system after that.
Is what it's? You said it's WatchGuard.
WatchGuard, correct.
WatchGuard. Was that the cloud-based system, or?
Couldn't tell you.
So in 2016, when you would finish a shift, what would you do with that video?
Once you pulled in the parking lot of the station, the video would upload.
It would upload. So
Yes.
you didn't have to make a copy on a DVD or a CD, right?
Right.
It would just automatically happen.
Correct.
If I may have just one more moment. I don't have any further questions. Thank you, sir.
Briefly, Your Honor, thank you.
Right.
Lieutenant, if you had dash cam at that time, and would you, to your knowledge, have had it on since it looks like you were coming from a distance away?
It would have been on, yes, because I had my blue lights and siren activated.
Okay.
Because my vehicle, just before you see me walking up here, you see me driving down the road and I'm past the sheriff's vehicle.
Okay.
It's automatically turned on with the blue lights.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
But I don't recall when we had that hack and all that stuff took place.
Got you. Okay. Thank you.
Let me make sure I'm clear. You were coming from west to east,
Yes, sir.
and it was recorded anything on 81 Highway 81 as you proceeded east,
Correct. Yes, sir.
and then you parked
Yes, sir. And I parked behind the sheriff vehicle,
facing east,
still facing east. Yes, sir.
and were your lights still going?
Yes, sir.
And all that was recorded was stop traffic.
We would have recorded all the eastbound traffic coming, eastbound traffic and the westbound traffic coming at us because we had the road completely blocked.
Right. Nothing went by there. Did you ever pull in the driveway where this house is?
No, sir.
So you probably wouldn't have picked up anybody standing on the side of the road as you came in on the camera.
Correct.
Or the as you parked, it was then no one passed you.
Correct, because I had to retrieve my rifle and everything from the trunk of the vehicle, so it was right there. Picked it up, I recall that part, and coming out and running through the door.
That prompts any other questions?
No, you're right.
I just want to ask one question. So you would have reported as you were arriving, but then once you parked, the house, the driveway, and everybody would have been behind you and not reported. Am I understanding correct?
Correct.
Thank you, sir. No other questions, Judge.
You can step down and be excused. Thank you for your
Thank you,
time.
sir.
Next.
Thank you, Your Honor. At this time, the state calls Randy Allen. Officer Randy Allen. You want to do that now? I'll just come up.
Yeah, he can sit up there and then we can
Come on up to the witness stand, officer.
Sir.
Sure. Well, Officer Allen is getting situated. Ms. Venuto and I had just some sort of logistical scheduling questions that we wanted to ask the court. I have one witness that I have under subpoena, and we're just sort of trying to sort out exactly when. I think that, and Ms. Venuto, please correct me if you see this differently, I don't believe that we will be able to finish today. And so I just wanted to make sure that my plan was to have my witness here at 10 a.m. tomorrow. I believe that we will have no problem finishing tomorrow, but I just wanted to make sure that that was okay with the court. I don't believe that Ms. Venuto has any issues with me calling or having our witness here at 10 a.m. tomorrow. And we do start at 10 a.m. tomorrow, right, Judge? Was that agreeable to the state?
I have no objection to that, Judge. I have one witness that I may call tomorrow who isn't available until he's coming from another job, so he won't be able to get here until about 10 o'clock-ish. I'm debating whether or not I'm going to call him. I don't know that I have to call him, but that is always a possibility. And I still have not heard back from defense to know if we're doing that plea tomorrow. So I'm going to assume that we're doing it, and I will not be available until 10.
So what I'm understanding is that you have a witness on subpoena, but they're coming tomorrow.
Yes, Judge, I could have them here in 2 hours, but I believe that we have more than enough witnesses to take us through the end of the day today.
I agree. I think you're right.
We certainly didn't want to hold up the court or anything, but I didn't want to have my witness.
The time we have, and we got to come back tomorrow. We'll be here as long as it takes.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you, Mr.
All right, raise your right hand, please. Don't take your mask off first. It's easier with both hands. All right, raise your right hand, solemnly swear the evidence you're about to give the opinion before this court to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God who you so far.
Yes, I do.
Have a seat. State your name for the record.
Officer Randy Allen,
And then Randy Allen, officer of the police department.
Tarrant County Police Department.
And, all right, that's all I got. You're up.
Thank you, Judge. Officer Allen, do you recall being at the residence here that you see on the video back on October 27th, 2016, that morning?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
Okay. And were you present when Matthew Baker and Brooke Knight were handcuffed in the street in the area right in front of the house?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, did you have an opportunity to view Officer Phillips' body camera?
Yes, I have.
Okay. And on that body camera, did you see and do you recall having any contact with Matthew Baker?
Yeah, very briefly.
Okay. And what was the nature of that contact?
I just stood by. He was standing by the vehicle, and I stood by him just to help secure the scene.
Okay. At any point, do you recall having any conversation with him or anything like that?
No, ma'am.
And then after you left that area down at the street area on Highway 81, do you recall going up towards the house or towards the driveway?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, do you recall, did you ever go in the house?
No, ma'am, I didn't.
Okay, but you were over in the area of the driveway?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And do you recall whether or not From the video, it appears that everyone had been detained before you got there. Were you present on the scene when everyone was unhandcuffed and no one was detained any longer?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you recall whether or not you unhandcuffed anyone or had any
No, I don't
participation?
recall.
You don't recall?
No,
But you do recall seeing people having their handcuffs removed and seeing them walking about freely at the house area?
yes, ma'am.
That's all the questions I have, Your Honor.
Good afternoon, officer. How are you today?
Good, thank you.
My name is Christina Rudy. I'm one of the lawyers that represents Mr. Baker. And I just have a few questions for you today. Now, officer, you didn't handcuff anyone that afternoon, did you? Or that morning, did you?
No, ma'am.
Did you unhandcuff anyone that day?
No, not that I recall.
Okay. When you arrived on the scene, was everybody already on Highway 81 near the police cars, or were you, or did you help anybody get to that location? That make sense?
When I arrived, there were individuals in the driveway as well as at the police car.
Okay. And did you escort anybody from the driveway to the police cars?
From the driveway to the police car? Yes, ma'am.
And who did you escort?
I believe the female.
One of the females. Do you remember whether she had blonde hair or dark
Not
hair?
necessarily all the way from the driveway, but up the street, up towards the cars.
So when you arrived, were there people on the ground face down in the driveway, or was everybody standing up and at that
It
point?
appeared to be up.
It appeared to be up, okay. And you said you didn't place handcuffs on anybody.
Not that I recall.
That day, Officer Allen, were you equipped with a body camera?
No, ma'am.
When you arrived, did you arrive in a vehicle that was marked or unmarked?
Mark.
And was that vehicle equipped with a dash cam
Should have been.
in 2016?
Yes, ma'am.
And when, to the best of your recollection, when your shift ended, what happened with that video? What was that process?
That video would have been uploaded as according to court line.
Automatically
Yes,
uploaded? So you didn't have to make a CD or DVD,
No,
right?
It
Okay.
uploaded.
Do you have any idea where that video might be now?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Officer, if you give me just one moment. And when you watched this video, you were able to identify yourself in the video, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Officer, I'm going to show a video on the screen behind you. It's going to take just a moment to load up. And when it does, I'm going to have just one question for you. Sir, do you see the video behind you?
Yes, I did.
And there is one officer in that video, right?
You speaking of myself?
It's you, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And the timestamp on this is 10:22 and 2 seconds. Is that right? In the left-hand corner, is that right? You can step down. Judge, may you step down if it would help him?
Step down, let's go to the corner over there.
I apologize, Your
You
Honor.
said here?
Yeah, in the lower left-hand corner.
Okay. the stamp number there. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And that's, just to make sure the record's clear, 10:22 and 2 seconds is the timestamp, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Have any further questions?
Any further from the state?
Yes, Your Honor, may I have one moment? Thank you. No, Your Honor, no questions.
All right, you can step down and be excused. Ask over.
Yes, sir.
Exit the courthouse. Next.
Thank you, Your Honor. All right, this time the state calls Robbie Savage.
All up to the witness stand. Mask off. Raise your right hand. Solemnly swear the evidence you're about to give about opinion for the court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God, will be so firm.
Yes, sir.
State your name for the record.
Robert Savage.
And you're employed,
I'm retired currently.
retired from,
Henry County Police Department.
when you were appointed to the County Police Department in October 2016.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. They will be asking you some questions.
Thank you, Your Honor. When you worked for the Henry County Police Department, what was your rank when you retired?
I had served as the major of the Criminal Investigations Division.
And as such, did you, as the major of CID, did you go out to the home over on Highway 81 in the morning hours of October 27th, 2016?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Did you participate in the murder investigation that had taken place, the murder that had taken place over on Moccasin Gap?
I did go to the scene. I did not participate in the investigative portion.
Okay, and as a major, was that pretty common there? You yourself weren't doing the investigation, but you were overseeing the others who were doing the investigating?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And did you come to the home, did you watch the body cam video?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, were you able to see yourself on that video?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you recall going to that house with Detective LaCroix?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you recall why you went with Detective LaCroix?
Yes, ma'am.
And could you tell the court?
Detective, when you have a major scene, detective, usually the first people to get there, the first responders, they usually get the car stuck in traffic, so to speak. Detective LaCroix had pulled in. He was there a lot earlier than I was. So when called to go to the second scene, I offered to give him a ride and just drove him over to the house on 81 East.
Okay. And when you drove Detective LaCroix over to the house on Highway 81 East, do you recall being near him as he was speaking to Matthew Baker?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And at that point, everybody had been unhandcuffed by the time that he was talking to him?
Yes, to my knowledge, yes, ma'am.
Okay. And did you have any conversation directly with Matthew Baker that you recall?
No, ma'am.
And were you in any way participating in their conversation?
No, ma'am.
And did you see yourself on the video kind of, I guess, standing behind Matthew Baker as he and Detective LaCroix were talking?
Yes, ma'am.
Could you hear what they were talking about?
No, ma'am.
And in fact, did you see yourself on the video talking to some of the other detectives or other officers on the scene?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you recall seeing yourself talking to Willie Rosser?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And who is Willie Rosser?
Willie Rawson was a detective assigned to the Criminal Investigation Division.
And he has since also retired?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you recall seeing yourself talking to or being near who is currently Lieutenant Danny Stapp?
I don't know that I can attest that for a fact. Whoever I was talking to was the backup, and I don't remember firsthand who it was.
Okay.
I do remember and I saw the video with it also.
And after Detective LaCroix and Matthew Baker finished talking there at the scene, did you participate in Matthew Baker's interview at the police department when he agreed to come to the police department to talk to Detective LaCroix?
No.
So what we saw on the video of you arriving, you said you drove him there, and you were kind of standing by as he was talking to Matthew Baker. Is that the extent of your involvement to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, ma'am.
That's all the questions I have, Your Honor.
Cross.
Yes, Judge. Good afternoon, sir. Now, that day in 2016, you didn't handcuff anybody, did you?
No, ma'am.
You didn't unhandcuff anybody, did you?
No, ma'am.
And you didn't interview anybody. That's your testimony?
Correct.
Okay. Sir, behind you there is a video. Are you able to see that video?
Yes, ma'am.
And in the lower left-hand corner of the screen, there is a timestamp. Are you able to see that?
The number's at 10:14:56.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. And there are two officers that are in this picture, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And the gentleman who is the furthest to the left, that's you, right?
The furthest to the left. There's
To the left, if you're looking at the screen, left to right, there are two officers that are looking back towards the camera, correct?
me and Detective McCoy.
That's you and Detective LaCroix. And Detective LaCroix is taller than you. Would that be a fair statement?
Yes, ma'am.
And Detective LaCroix in this picture is the one that's pointing sort of behind him. Would that be right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I'm going to show you another video here, sir. If I can have just one moment here. And you're able to see this video as well, sir. I'm going to back it up. Whoop, I apologize. Just back this up just a few seconds here. And you're able to see this video, correct, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
And the timestamp in the lower left-hand corner is 10:32:09, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And what we're looking at here are a number of police officers and a young man in a plaid shirt standing near a police car, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And, sir, you are one of the officers standing by that police car, correct?
Correct.
And you are actually standing with your back to the camera, right? That's you?
Mhm.
And you are standing next to the young man in the plaid shirt, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And his back is also to the camera, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then there are two other officers that you are facing. Is that Detective or Lieutenant Stapp in the bluish shirt, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And then that is, I don't want to get his title wrong, but Sergeant Rosser or Lieutenant Rosser. That's the other gentleman in the yellowish shirt,
His
correct?
name is Ross, yes, ma'am.
Okay. Sir, in 2016, you show up in plain clothes, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And the vehicle that you arrived in, was that a marked or unmarked patrol car?
Unmarked.
And were unmarked patrol cars in 2016 equipped with dash cams?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so the car that you arrived in did not have a dash cam, right?
No,
And you were, I apologize, you can finish.
I said, no, ma'am.
No, ma'am. Okay. And you weren't wearing a body cam that day, right?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Oh, and sir, if we're looking at this picture, you do have your firearm with you that day, correct?
I would have been wearing, yes, ma'am.
And to the best of your memory, were the other officers, the other 3 officers standing next to you, were they armed as well?
Both staff and Willie Roster are right-handed. I assume that they're wearing their firearms. I don't know, I can't see
Okay.
the young man to my left is not.
Would that have been standard procedure for them to have a firearm with them?
Yes.
Okay. I don't have any further questions. Thank you, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thanks, Deputy.
That's all, Judge. I don't have any
Step
further
down
questions.
and excuse. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Y'all have a blessed day.
All right. Next witness.
Your Honor, the next witness that the state has is going to be Sergeant LaCroix. Well, at the time he was Detective LaCroix. And I will be calling him, but I guess before we do, I'm not sure, do we want to go
Probably
back?
I'll take a 10-minute break, and then we'll get off. It'll be a lot longer than the rest of it.
Yes, we will.
Okay, so we'll take a 10-minute break and we'll get set up and move to his examination.
All right, thank you, Judge. I'm gonna go something. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Those are the original.
Okay.
Unless you guys need.
Today's sitting will come to order. Everybody ready?
Yes, Your Honor, I just wanted to put on the record, my office made a copy of that letter that you gave us for the defense. We have a copy, and there's the original.
All right, thank you very much. I haven't read it, I'm not gonna unless I have to, unless somebody says there's something I have to read in there. I just thought anything that comes in on this case, I mean, let's be aware of.
I don't think there's anything that the court needs to be apprised about.
Okay. All right. Next witness.
All right, thank you, Your Honor. At this time, the state calls Sergeant David LaCroix. And Your Honor, did you decide do you want me to redirect him, or do you want to pick up where the defense was on cross, knowing that we're...
Start all over. You would not start all over. Go ahead and pick up as if you would just not bring it across.
Okay, so
They'll have, when the time they get across, they'll have all of the cross to do.
we'll continue with direct. Okay, thank you, Judge.
And if you cover something we've already covered before, I'm not gonna get upset about it. It's hard to keep up with that after 2 months. So, all right, we'll put you on oath again. Raise your right hand, please. If you solemnly swear the evidence you're about to give is not opinion for the sport, but the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God and be your soul firm.
I do.
And your name for the record, if you take the mask off, might be helpful.
Sergeant David LaCroix, LAC-ROY,
And we're going with the,
Henry County Police Department.
all right, you can have a seat. All right, we're gonna stay on track. They're gonna ask questions. Go back to the state first. Not sort of pick up where we left off, but pick up and add on some extra questions they were written on the result of the video that came to light. And then the defense will do the cross examination.
Yes, sir.
May proceed.
Thank you, Judge. So, Sergeant LaCroix, you previously testified back on September, I think, 6th and 7th. We kind of did a couple of motions in one, so just to cover things. I believe we talked about that you spoke to Matthew Baker in the driveway at his home on Highway 81 East, is that correct?
That is correct.
And in that is going to be State's Exhibit 1, that is the audio recording of the discussion that you had with him, is that right?
That is right.
Okay. Then I think we further talked about State's Exhibit 2, which was your conversation with his mother, Angelia Lanier, also in the driveway, where Matthew Baker can be heard interjecting and speaking to both of you kind of in the background or off to the side. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And in that interview, in both of the interviews that you did with him, or the discussion that you had with him in the driveway and his mother, at that time everybody had been uncuffed. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And at that time, anyone who had been previously detained while they were searching the house for Jacob Koski, by that point, everyone was no longer detained and they were free to move about.
That's correct.
And just for clarification, Matthew Baker did indeed move freely about the driveway, the yard, that whole area. Is that correct?
He did.
Okay. And then at some point, you'd asked him if he would come up to the police department, and you interviewed him there.
That's correct.
And that's going to be State's Exhibit 3, which is the recorded interview, audio and video recorded interview. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And did he also, at the end of your portion of the interview with him, did you ask him to write a written statement?
I did.
And that's going to be the written statement that he gave, which is State's Exhibit 4. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then from the time that you came back into the interview room to give him the statement form and the pen to write that statement, did you come back into the room at all and re-engage him in the interview process?
After I gave him the statement form?
Yes.
No, I did not read it.
Okay, so that was the last time you had any interaction with him that day was giving him that interview or that statement form
That's correct.
after you audio and video taped his interview.
Yes, that is correct.
And I think we covered, but just to be clear, at that point, you had not read him Miranda, is that correct?
That's correct. I had not read him Miranda.
And I think you testified that because he was not in custody, is that right?
That is right.
He was not being detained at that point?
That is correct.
Was it your intent to, after you interviewed everyone, when you left from the house on Highway 81, Matthew Baker's house, when you left there and went to the police department, was it your intent to interview these folks, talk to them and see what they knew, and then have them driven back to Matthew Baker's house?
Yes, everyone that had been on scene, we're making plans as far as once the interviews were done to take them back to the residence. And I actually spoke with Ms. Lanier, where she specifically stated that these can come back and I'll take them home when I go back from work, or wherever it is, as far as whatever she was going to run.
And when you were saying these, was she referring to Kayla Head, Brooke Knight, and Jacob Williams?
She was.
And of course, you talked about returning her son, Matthew Baker, to the house as well. And I think, just so we're clear, what was it that changed that plan?
During the interview with Mr. Baker, some information as far as came to light on what he was told upon arrival back to the house with Mr. Koski, leading up to the entrance into the home, the deed occurring, and leaving from there. Some information from Mr. Baker had stated to me that he was told by Mr. Koski in uncertain terms, because he used several different ways to do it, that everyone in the house is going to get on the ground and going to get it. Everyone in the house is going to get it. You know, everyone in the house is going to get on the ground. Something as far as along those lines. And again, followed Mr. Koski into the house. Mr. Koski made contact with Ms. Owner at the front door, fired the first shots, entered into the house, and Mr. Baker said that he entered in the house behind him. Everything was kind of a blur from how he was describing it, and that he did follow behind Mr. Koski, searching from room to room, and then left with him.
And did you have a witness who was in one of those rooms who saw them walking together, searching from room to room?
I had a witness that identified just they saw two subjects walking from room to room after the gunshots had subsided. That witness positively identified Mr. Jacob Cosby, and then he also identified the other subject, stating that couldn't quite make out a whole lot of information about it. He had a hoodie pulled over his head with the drawstring pulled closed where he couldn't really see his face. From the interview process of Mr. Baker, he verified that he was that second subject with Mr. Cosby.
Okay. And in the interim, from the time that you got to the police department until you interviewed Matthew Baker, during that period, did you interview Jacob Cosby?
We did. During the process of getting everything situated on the scene at Mr. Baker's house to get everybody transported to headquarters, I was notified that Mr. Cosby had contacted 911 and was talking about making contact with the police, turning himself in, something as far as along those lines. Some units that were on scene were supposedly going to the location where Mr. Cosby was said to be at. Other units were taking Ms. Head, Ms. Knight, Mr. Williams, and Mr. Baker to our actual headquarters. And then from that point, I was taken actually back to the actual crime scene where I could get my vehicle, I believe, and drive my vehicle back to headquarters. And at that, by the time I got back to headquarters, Mr. Koski had been apprehended and placed in an interview room. Myself and Detective Gleason interviewed Mr. Koski prior to interviewing Mr. Baker.
Right. And in fact, you recall your recorded interview with, or your recorded discussion with Matthew Baker there at the scene in the driveway, talking to him, and did you indeed get a phone call that indicated that Jacob Koski, or you were speaking to someone that Jacob Koski was saying he was going to turn himself in?
I did.
All right, so then once you confirmed that you had the eyewitness who saw the two of them walking through the house, you confirmed with Jacob Koski and confirmed with Matthew Baker that Matthew Baker was indeed that person with Jacob Koski walking through the house. Is that, coupled with some of the other things that Mr. Baker himself said, part of what changed your mind and made you decide to take out a warrant for Matthew Baker?
It is. After the interview with Mr. Baker, when I left him, was up with his opportunity as far as to write his written statement. I met with some of our, it's the supervisory staff that was overseeing the homicide investigation of this. I believe it was Captain Harned, I believe Major Savage was there. As far as the command staff, we're kind of pulling information what we had from the crime scene, from Mr. Koski's statement, the other detectives that were interviewing the other parties involved, the statements as far as what they were providing, kind of pulling all our information to see as far as what we had, what information was known. Is there anything that we're looking at that will provide any further charges for anybody that we had there at that moment? Pulling everything together with everything we had after a discussion of the decision that was made, that we had probable cause to charge Matthew Baker with the murders in connection with Mr. Koski.
And then, now you've had an opportunity, now that we know about Officer Phillips, his body camera was located, or the recording of his body camera was located. Have you had an opportunity to review that video?
I have.
And did you see yourself on that video?
I did.
And when you saw yourself on the video, do you recall initially walking up, walking down the street and walking up, presumably up the driveway?
I do.
Okay, when is the first time that you recall having any direct contact with Matthew Baker?
In direct contact with Mr. Baker, from correctly, was actually in the driveway. I believe it was about midways up the driveway. There was a vehicle parked. I can't remember what type of vehicle it was. It wasn't the white Jeep in which he was in. I believe it was a darker colored car, possibly a Crown Victoria. I initially spoke with Mr. Baker to the side of that vehicle, away from, I guess, the officers that were standing out in the street. There was myself. Major Savage was standing at the back of that vehicle. Major Savage was the one that drove me to the actual scene to speak with Mr. Baker, and a couple of other detectives that were there to assist with the witnesses were standing by. I spoke with Mr. Baker to the driver's side of that vehicle, kind of getting a preliminary idea of what had happened, what had been going on.
And at that point, was he in handcuffs?
He was.
At that point, was he free to move about?
He was.
At that point, was everyone who had been detained, and just to be clear, I'm talking about Brooke Knight, Kayla Head, Jacob Williams, Miss Lanier, Mr. Baker's sister, anyone else who was there, were they all free to move about?
They were.
And were they doing so?
They were.
And in fact, once you stopped talking to Mr. Baker in the driveway and went to go speak to his mother, did Matthew Baker then walk over to y'all as you two were having a conversation?
He did.
You and Miss Lanier having a conversation?
He did.
And that's what the conversation that we heard in State's Exhibit 2, the recording with Miss Lanier.
It is.
And now that you have seen that video, is there anything that changes with regards to your prior testimony? Did you see yourself have any additional contact or have any different contact with Matthew Baker in that video than what you originally recalled?
No.
I don't know if I asked you this last time, but I'm going to ask you. Do you see Matthew Baker, the young man that you had the conversation on the driveway, and then the interview at the Henry County Police Department? Do you see him here in court today?
I do.
And could you identify where he's located and what he's wearing for the record?
He is to my left, the table, third person from my left, appears to be a black suit, blue shirt, striped tie with a blue mask on.
You said he's the third person?
From my left.
Right to left.
Going right to left. Okay,
Yeah, from right to left.
Got you. Okay, thank you. That is all the questions I have, Judge.
All right.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Judge, do you have any objection to me moving up to the podium?
No objection whatsoever.
Thank you, Judge. Now, when you testified in September, you testified that when you arrived, nobody was being detained. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you testified that no one informed you that anybody had been detained before you arrived, is that right?
Advised as that they made detainment to the house. On my arrival, everyone had been, I guess, from whatever detention, I say it's released as far as my hand goes. I do not remember exactly this when I arrived on scene, if it was afterwards as far as like the situation debrief at the end, if it was all right, this is everything that led up as far as when we're there at the house as far as the end.
So is it, and I just want to make sure that I understand, when you had your conversation with Mr. Baker at the driveway, is it your testimony that at that time you didn't know whether anyone had been detained?
I knew they'd been detained because they were detained as far as clearing the house from Mr. Koski. I was made aware of that as I was approaching.
Before
I made contact with Mr. Baker.
Thank you. Do you remember what time you arrived at 3300 Highway 81?
I do not remember exactly. We got the phone call to go to Moxon Gap approximately 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. If I had to estimate, possibly 10 or 11 o'clock that following morning. I don't know for sure.
Okay. And when you arrived, they were still in the process of clearing that house, right?
From what I remember, the house had been cleared. Everyone was standing outside of the house. I don't recollect when I arrived if anyone was still inside the house. It had been cleared.
So, to the best of your recollection, when you arrived, there were no officers inside the house. It had already been cleared?
I never went inside the house. I did not see any officers inside the house when I arrived.
Okay. And when you arrived, you didn't talk to anybody until you were in the driveway, right?
Correct.
You didn't talk to anyone on Highway 81, right?
There was whichever officer was standing by, as I walked past him, it was like, I don't remember the exact term, but it was, I guess, pointing me in the direction where everyone else was at. I did stop and turn around and acknowledge that from what I saw on the video. At the initial time, of course, I don't remember that little side conversation. As far as with that video is, one of the officers telling me where everyone else was at. I turned, interchanged with him with that, and then went in the direction where he was telling me where everyone was at.
But during that time, you didn't have a conversation with Mr. Baker,
No, I did not.
or Miss Head,
No.
or Miss Knight, or Mr. Williams, right? Okay. Now, at the driveway, you did have multiple conversations with Mr. Baker, right?
Yes.
And the first time let me rephrase. You also had a conversation at least one conversation with Miss Kayla Head, right?
Wasn't really a conversation, if I remember correctly, as I was speaking with Mr. Baker. Ms. Head was being led to the vehicle to get something out of the vehicle or something. As she approaches me, she makes the comment, "Oh my God, I drove the car in a murder," or something as far as along those lines. And I saw that, all right, hang on a second, because I'm not going to take on those type of two conversations at the same time. And directed her to another location and we can finish and continue to speak with Mr. Baker.
Okay, so you said to her, "Hold on a minute, go over here, I'm going to be with you in a second."
Yes.
Essentially?
That's
okay.
essentially, yes.
And you had a conversation with Miss Angela Lanier, right?
I did.
And you know that to be Mr. Baker's mother, right?
I did.
Okay. And one of the reasons why they had directed you to, the other officers had directed you to talk to Kayla Head was because she was upset, right?
She was visibly, obviously upset, yes.
And she was crying, right?
Yes.
And you at one point say that you felt that she was too upset to drive.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Now, when you spoke with Mr. Baker, at first you have some small talk.
Mm-hmm.
Who are you? What's your name? Where do you live, right?
Yes.
And then that part, that wasn't recorded, correct?
I don't believe so, no.
And in that part that wasn't recorded, you didn't read Mr. Baker his Miranda rights, correct?
Correct.
And you didn't tell Mr. Baker that he was free to leave at any time, right?
I did not explicitly tell him that.
And you didn't tell him that he could stop talking to you at any time. You didn't explicitly tell
I
him
did not
that, right?
explicitly tell him that.
And you didn't explicitly tell Mr. Baker that he could have a lawyer with him while you were talking with him, right?
I did not explicitly tell him that either.
And that's because it was this conversation in the driveway, and in your opinion, Mr. Baker was not detained at that point, and that's why you didn't read him his Miranda rights, right?
Also, on top of that, I had no information at that time to place Mr. Baker as far as an actual suspect to this crime. He was, from the information gathered on scene from the initial interviews, he was looked at as far as at this point as far as a possible witness. I had no real evidence to tie him to anything involving the actual crime.
But at some point during that conversation, you begin recording it, correct?
I did.
And in that recording, you say that the reason you start recording is because you want an accurate record of what's said, right?
Correct.
Okay. And in that recording, you don't read Mr. Baker his Miranda rights during that recorded part either,
I did
right?
not, no.
And you don't explicitly tell him that he's free to leave, right?
No.
And you don't explicitly tell him that he can stop talking to you, right?
Right, I don't know.
And you also don't tell him that explicitly that he's allowed to have a lawyer with him while he talks to you, right?
That's correct.
And in that interview with him, that conversation with him, let's talk about sort of the contents of that conversation. You ask him where Kosky is, right?
Right.
And you ask him when he last saw Mr. Kosky, right?
Right.
And you ask him about his whereabouts the night before.
That's correct.
And you ask him whether or not there are people that can verify his whereabouts the night before, right?
Right.
And you ask some pretty detailed questions about where he was and when he was there, right? Would that be a fair statement?
He was, right, because Mr. Baker was having a hard time really explaining as far as where he was at. He said he didn't really know the area. I think he made the term something because it was something like because it was a country place. We're trying to very without being able for him to sit there and tell me yes, I was at such and such address in Moxon Gap at a field party or whatever. I was trying to kind of narrow down that area where he said as far as he was at because again he wasn't able to give me a direct address or a direct location. Using a description of what he saw when he was there, trying to have detailed questions to figure out are we talking about the same place.
Right, and some of those detailed questions include whether there was a horse on the location, right?
Yes.
And whether there had been a bonfire, right?
Yes.
Okay. And now, if you recall, when that recording starts, there's a lot of background noise because you're near the highway, right?
Yes.
And you can hear some sirens going, right?
Yes.
And as I said, this conversation is happening outside,
It is.
not inside Mr. Baker's home.
It is not.
And obviously you're outside. You didn't give Mr. Baker a written Miranda waiver form, right?
I did not.
And now let's turn to this conversation that you have with Miss Angela Lanier.
Mm-hmm.
And in the middle of that conversation, you said that a young woman interrupts you, right? To ask to.
Oh, about getting something else out of the vehicle. I thought it was a feminine product or something along those lines.
Do you remember who that was that interrupted you or
I don't
approaches
remember
you?
I don't remember off the top of my head. It may have been Miss Head, but I don't want to say with certainty because I don't.
Do you recall what vehicle it was that she wanted to get something out of?
The light and color Jeep.
And at that point, that's when you're talking about this young lady being upset, right?
Right.
And you do let her get something from that vehicle, right?
Open the door, stay there with her, of course, directs as far as where it is she's trying to get and watch when she gets out of the vehicle.
Because she comes to you to ask for permission to do that, right?
She did.
And then she asks you if it's okay to go stand somewhere. Do you recall that part?
No, I was talking on that.
Now, this conversation that you have with Miss Lanier, that is a lot about Mr. Kosky, correct?
Yes, he's provided me information that she heard about him over the past few days or so.
And most of that conversation is about Mr. Baker, right?
It is not.
And she talks about one of her other sons, right?
She mentioned about if JD was there when we arrived, probably it could have been a different situation because saying that he had anger issues, and that's about as far as I remember her mentioning as far as about for JD, and then I don't remember her mentioning anything else about another son. I don't know where she had it.
And then she talked about her daughter too, correct?
Yes, she did.
And how her daughter had been in the home.
Right.
And how she wanted her daughter to be able to come out safely.
Right.
Right.
One of her grandchild or her daughter's child was either in the house with the daughter or like both of them were going to come outside, something along those lines.
So it's a fair bit into this conversation before the discussion between you and Miss Lanier turns to Mr. Baker, right?
Right.
And at one point she asks you if someone approaches you, I apologize, someone, not Miss Lanier, but another person approaches you and asks you if they need to be transported. Do you recall that part of the conversation?
I do. It's like it's kind of off to the side. As I was speaking with Lanier, someone came up and asked, and I said, yeah, they can be transported and go.
And that was another officer, right?
I believe so. It was one of our other Henry County units, whether it be another officer or one of the other detectives or detective sergeants that was on scene. Someone that works with our department, yes.
It wasn't a civilian.
It was not civilian.
Okay. And the they that they're talking about in that part of the conversation, you're talking about Mr. Baker, Miss Head, Miss Knight, and Mr. Williams, correct?
For my recollection with that at that time, Mr. Baker was up there speaking or up there close where I was speaking with Miss Lanier. The question at the time was asking about Miss Head, Miss Knight, and Mr. Williams, as I wasn't speaking with them as far as at that time it appeared to be also in the conversation with Miss Lanier and Mr. Baker.
Okay, so the three people that they were talking about when they said, can they be transported, that was referring to those three individuals. But ultimately, Mr. Baker was transported to
Ultimately,
the
he was
headquarters,
taken
right?
right into his man.
And he was transported with Mr. Williams, right?
I do not remember who he was transported with.
Okay. But the officer that actually transported, he would know, right?
He would. I'm not even sure which officer transported.
Okay.
Because again, from that time, from getting this situated for the transport, then having the information as far as from Mr. Kosky trying to turn himself in, once we got that situated, there was a lot of other information put forth to kind of put other wheels in motion to get everything going with this. I didn't see which vehicle he got into, which officer took him.
And you just mentioned that there was a lot going on, because there's a lot of information coming in, right?
A lot of information.
And there's a lot of people that you need to track.
Yes.
And you want to make sure that you don't miss some information that would be important, right? And this was a case in which, at that time, 3 people had died and 1 person was in critical condition, right?
Correct.
This was a serious case.
It is.
Probably one of the most serious cases that you've had in your career, correct?
Yes.
And Mr. Kosky was the person that you were looking for, that you believed had shot those 4 people, right?
Correct. From the information we had, he was our main prime identified suspect. Granted, we understood that there was a second person with him that we didn't know as ours at the time. But yes, Mr. Kosky was our prime identified suspect.
And the way that you were able to, and when I say you, I mean the police department in general, were able to identify Mr. Kosky as you said, the prime suspect, was because you had interviews with other witnesses prior to arriving at 3300 Highway 81 that morning, right?
I was involved with processing the scene. There was an interview done with, I believe, Mr. Kosky's half-sister and then another interview done with the subject that was hiding, and that was found as far as hiding in the back bedroom. I was not involved in either one of those interviews, but the information from those interviews was relayed to them.
And when you say that you, the information that you had was that there was a second person in the house with Mr. Koski, that information came from those earlier interviews, right?
Correct.
And even though you weren't the person that conducted those interviews, that information had been passed on to you, right?
Correct.
Okay. And just to clarify something that you had talked about with Ms. Venuto a moment ago, there was a young man who was in the house who saw two people walking around, correct?
Correct.
And he was able to identify one of them as Jacob Koski, correct?
Correct.
And he was not able to identify the other person that was with Mr. Koski.
That's correct.
And he was provided with a lineup, right?
He was provided with a photo lineup to try to identify Mr. Koski, that he positively identified. There was not a secondary lineup conducted
He
to
was
try to
only,
identify the second person.
he was only provided with one
One
lineup. That's okay. And you tell Mr. Baker during your recorded conversation with him, you tell him that you know that there was a second person that was in the house with Mr. Koski, right?
I told him that, yes.
Now, so in your report, you state that you told Mr. Baker that he was not under arrest yet whenever you're having that conversation with him at the driveway. Is that right?
In the driveway?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. But that's not in the recorded part of your conversation, right?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay, so if we're listening to the recording, we're not going to hear you say, Mr. Baker, you're not under arrest yet.
To my recollection, I don't believe so, no.
And the language in your report is that you told them you're not under arrest yet, or you're not under arrest at this time, right?
Yes.
Now, when you are arranging this interview at the police station, you tell Mr. Baker that you need to talk to him, right?
Right.
And that's because you believe that Mr. Baker has some information, one way or the other, in a very important case.
I do.
A very serious case.
Yes.
And so it is not, can you come to the police station, right? You say, I need to talk to you, right?
This is one of the lines of asking, would you mind coming to headquarters to do an interview? I need to talk to you about information. It was a non-specific, hey, can you come down to headquarters? Because I need to speak to you about some information, wherever the terminology was used, I don't know as far as verbatim. Would y'all have an issue coming into headquarters to get a formal interview and speak to me, something as far as along those lines?
But if in your report you write that you need to speak with Mr. Baker, then you need to speak with Mr. Baker, right?
I did. I felt it was, again, at that time, I felt it was some fairly crucial information that would help further this investigation or further paint as far as what we need, where we need to go with our next steps with Mr. Koski or whatever the case may be with our other outstanding suspect at that time.
So let's briefly return to this conversation with Miss Lanier.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that conversation with Miss Lanier is recorded, right?
It is.
From start to finish, right?
It is.
It's not a situation like with Mr. Baker where some of it was recorded, the small talk wasn't, but some of it was recorded. That's not the situation with Miss Lanier,
That's not the
right?
situation with Miss Lanier.
Okay. Now, during that conversation with Miss Lanier, you don't ask her, can I interview Matt, right?
Right.
And you don't ask her, can I interview Kayla, right?
Right.
Or Brooke or Jacob, right?
Right.
And that's because it's not up to her.
Right.
That if anyone's going to give permission to be interviewed, it's got to be the person that you want to interview, right?
Sure.
And you say to her, all we're going to do is a formal interview, right?
Right.
And you're speaking with Miss Lanier But Mr. Baker, according to your testimony, is nearby, right?
Off on the periphery, yes.
Okay. But you don't turn to him and say, Matt, can I interview you, right?
No.
Okay. And you don't tell Miss Lanier that Mr. Baker doesn't have to come to the station to be interviewed, right?
No.
And you don't tell her that Matt's free to go, right?
No.
And you don't tell her that Matt can have a lawyer with him, right?
No.
Okay. And in fact, during the conversation that you have with Miss Lanier, you don't speak to Mr. Baker at all, right?
That's my recollection.
You speak to Miss Lanier,
Right.
and you speak to, we think it might be Miss Head who asked to get into the vehicle, right?
Right.
And then the officer that comes to ask you who needs to be transported, right?
Right.
But to the best of your recollection, you don't have another conversation with Mr. Baker.
Right.
So Mr. Baker is quote unquote interjecting into this conversation. You're not responding to him, right?
Not directly, no.
Now, Miss Lanier, the one that you were talking to, she was never transported to the police station in a police car, right?
She was not.
Now, you tell Miss Lanier that you need to speak with them and that you're going to arrange for them to come back home after your time talking to them, right?
Right.
But that conversation is with Miss Lanier, right?
Right.
Not with Mr. Baker.
Not directly with Mr. Baker, but again, he is still standing in the periphery.
Now, your testimony was at the time that you're talking with Mr. Baker in the driveway that he was, in your opinion, a witness, not a suspect, right?
Correct.
But you didn't offer for him to be able to come to the police station in his own vehicle, right?
Correct.
And you didn't offer for him to make a phone call for someone else to come get him and take him to the police station, right? And or you didn't give him an opportunity to maybe set up an appointment to come down to the police station a little bit later in the morning, right?
Right.
Because it was time sensitive. You needed to talk to Mr. Baker then, right?
Right.
Okay. What steps did you take prior to Mr. Baker being transported to the police station for Mr. Baker to be returned home, if any?
We had spoken, or the idea was once the interviews were done and concluded, it would be either the uniform patrol shifts that was on duty at the time of the ending of the interview, or any of the CID detectives that were not currently working an angle on the investigation, returning it back home.
Okay, so it would be another officer that would take him home. That was your plan, right? And so that wouldn't be, they would need to wait for that officer to be available, right?
Because speaking directly with Miss Lanier Staples on, like she would have had something that she had to do, whether we going to work running an errand, she wouldn't be able to pick them up. So we can get them back home, so we can, whether it be the uniform patrol shift that was on duty at the time, or one of our, detective that's not working angle, we can get them back home. It's not an issue.
But it would have been when someone with the police department had the opportunity to do it, right?
Correct.
Okay.
We had officers there, to my recollection, I believe some of the officers that the transporting were still standing by in other areas of the department. Again, I didn't see them when I came to the department, it was straight to the interview rooms. But my recollection is they were transporting, they were still there, because they had paperwork that they had to complete. They didn't leave to go back out on the road and continue to patrol.
But there wasn't an officer that was assigned to, hey, wait here, your task with this case is to transport these individuals home when they're done being interviewed. There
was not a specific officer that was tasked with that task.
So once Mr. Baker arrives at the police station, he is photographed, right?
I was not there when Mr. Baker arrived. I do not know his first steps as far as when he arrived. If they photographed him, or if he was taken to another area as far as to sit. Because again, I know when I arrived, Mr. Koski was already there in the interview room, and he was the only one that I physically laid eyes on at that time. I did not know where Mr. Baker, Miss Knight, Miss Head, or Mr. Williams were at that point. I had never seen them when they entered into the building.
Because you were already interviewing Mr. Koski.
When they were getting transported, I was, Major Savage was taking me back to my vehicle so I could drive back to the actual headquarters, interview Mr. Koski. So whatever interactions they had with other officers, whatever, if I was myself and Detective Gleason were in the interview room with Mr. Koski.
And was it always the plan for you to be the one that interviewed Mr. Baker?
It ended up working that way. Primarily, of course, they wanted myself and Detective Gleason to interview Mr. Koski. There were a couple of other detectives that were available that were interviewing the other parties, and there wasn't a specific thing stating, hey, Detective LaCroix, you're going to be the one to interview Detective Baker. Again, working from a witness standpoint, it was one, but we were interviewing these people. We get somebody as far as getting an opening, we'll try to get this, we'll try to get somebody in that opening, so we're not out here all night wasting everybody's time with these witness interviews.
But Mr. Baker was waiting for someone to interview him, a detective to
Yes.
interview him.
Yes.
Whether that was you or one of the other detectives on the case, right? And it happened to be you that.
It happened to be me.
And the reason why it took a minute, so to speak, for you to be able to interview Mr. Baker is because you were interviewing Mr. Koski.
Correct.
Is it standard procedure for you to keep people that you are interviewing separated from one another while you're waiting to interview them?
It is.
So Mr. Baker wouldn't have been in a room with Mr. Williams, Miss Head, or Miss Knight, right?
Normally, we try to keep witnesses from being around each other as far as to not contaminate information
So he would have been sitting in a room alone.
with another officer, but not with any of the other parties involved.
Okay. So there would have been an officer with them.
Certainly is.
And that's because back in headquarters, people can't just walk around however they want, right?
It's a access control building because it is the police department. It's
Right.
not just walking throughout the hallways.
So in order for someone to walk about the hallways, they'd have to have an officer with them, or they would have to be somebody with access like yourself, right?
Yes.
Okay. So if Mr. Baker needed to use the restroom, somebody would have needed to make sure that, escort him to the restroom,
You would
right?
show them where the restroom is at. Yes.
But he wouldn't have just been able to walk around and go to the restroom by himself, right?
If he got up and said he had to go to the restroom, no one would have attempted to stop him.
Sure, but you're not gonna, someone's always gonna keep eyes on him so he's not wandering around unescorted, right?
Again, it's a controlled access point, police department. There are other things in the police department that, although are not really pertaining to him, there are police matters, armory, weapons, things along those lines. People walking throughout the hallways are trying to make sure we limit any sort of silliness that might happen as far as somebody going into areas they're not supposed to be in.
And so even if I were to come to police headquarters, I'm not a police officer, I'm not a suspect, I'm not even a witness, I'm gonna have somebody with me if I'm back there in that controlled area, right?
Any visitors that come to the front, whether it be witnesses, suspects, whoever, they even to pick up property or speak with someone, they check in as far as the front as a visitor, given a visitor's pass, someone meets them up front and brings them back, regardless of what their reasoning for the police to be there is, to have to come in the back.
Gotcha. Now, before we talk a bit more about just have one moment here, Judge. Okay, just one moment. So, I'm just gonna ask some questions about state streets, Mr. Baker's. apologize, Your Honor. Give me one more moment here. So are you able to see the screen behind you? There's nothing on it yet, but are you able to see?
I think it looks like the outline of a calendar up there. It's starting to look clearer.
Okay. It's coming in clear now, right?
Yeah, it will.
So I'm showing you what has been admitted as State's Exhibit number 3. Do you recognize this room?
There's an interview room at the interview department headquarters.
Okay. And the date on this recording, sir? What is that?
The October 27, 2016 would have been the time and date stamp of the video system that is equipped within that interview room.
Now, the time there is 14:41 and 53 seconds. Is that time accurate? To the best of your memory?
To the best of my memory, yes.
Right, and so we're talking about 20 minutes before 3 in the afternoon, thereabouts, right?
Correct.
Okay. So I'm gonna back up a little bit here. Now, in what we see here on the screen is during your interview with Mr. Baker, right?
Right.
And you have moved the table off to the side of the room, correct?
Correct.
And Mr. Baker's facing the screen, or the camera, right?
Right.
And your back is to the camera.
Right.
And to your left is where Mr. Baker is sitting.
Right.
And the door of the room is to the right of you, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so if I'm looking at the screen and I'm going from left to right on the screen, we see on the left wall, we see Mr. Baker, we see you, and then we see the door, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, at 14:55 and 32 seconds on that day, that door wasn't locked at that point, right?
Correct.
Okay. And when Mr. Baker came into this room, he had been brought to this room by an officer, right?
I believe so.
Okay. And so we're just gonna watch this for just one moment. There's no audio at the moment.
If I did not walk in the house when walked in, I'm standing at the bottom step thinking that they're gonna come out and we're gonna start fighting, blah blah blah, and then we leave. Okay, well, no, that's not how it went. he didn't talk.
Do you remember hearing anything after the first shot?
Okay, so detective, by 17:04, you had left the room, correct?
In this shot, yes. I don't remember the time frame. If this was, I stepped out briefly to get his witness statement or not, but yes, at this moment I'm not in the room.
But at this point, the verbal interview with Mr. Baker had been completed by this time, right? Okay. And Mr. Baker's in the room by himself.
Correct.
Do you know at this time whether or not that door was locked or not?
If he had not gotten his statement form yet, the door had not been locked.
Okay. So you lock the door. The door's, let me rephrase the question, I apologize. The door is unlocked up until you bring him the witness statement form and leave. That's when the door gets locked, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. He had not given you his completed witness form at that point, right? When you locked the door, he had not completed the form yet.
I handed him the statement form, highlighting what information I need, whatever I don't need, or whatever, and provided him with that, and stepped outside the last time as far as to write, as far as me exiting the room when I exited the room when the door was locked.
And at that point, before you received his written statement form, at that point, you consider Mr. Baker to be a suspect, right?
When I handed the statement form,
Yeah.
at the moment, from my aspect of it, I'm still looking at him as far as a witness, because the problem that I was dealing with is wondering as far as from mere presence alone, are we looking at it from the aspect as far as he actually going to be a suspect or not? I did not have a clear answer in my head, or any stretch of the imagination from the aspect, are we talking from mere presence, or are there other things from here now from his statement that I'm looking at that I'm missing?
Okay.
That I need to clarify as far as with my supervisors and command staff.
So, I just want to make sure that I have the sequence of events correct. You interview Mr. Kosky, and Mr. Baker's not a suspect at that point. Mr. Baker, in your mind, is a witness at that point, right?
Correct. Granted, Mr. Kosky stated he was with him, but I still had the uncooperated word. That is not going to be enough as far as to make him a suspect. It is still something along the lines, I do not have enough to say that yes, he is now primarily a suspect within this case. It is some of the information we need to clarify that we know what we're looking at to make sure we're not getting lied to.
Okay. And lied to by Mr. Kosky, right?
Whoever.
Okay. And when you are finished with the verbal portion of the interview with Mr. Baker's still a witness in your mind, right?
Yes, in my mind, because he's providing a statement form to me. I still have nothing in my head that sits there and says, based off what I know, that I can unequivocally say, yes, he is now primary suspect. Am I looking at this as far as from mere presence with him not having knowledge of, or is he an active participant? There's still an issue as far as what I'm dealing with here. As he's writing his statement, when I had the meeting with my supervisors and stuff, to pull all the information we had, and from there, from the supervisory side of it, from their years of experience, is where discussion was made. It's beyond more than mere presence. I believe we have no problem with those.
And so when you hand him that form to fill out, Mr. Baker's still a witness in your mind, right?
Correct.
And when you walk out that door, Mr. Baker hasn't handed you back his witness form, so he's still, in your mind, a witness, right?
Correct.
Okay. What specifically was it that Mr. Baker said in his interview that moved him from being a witness to being a suspect?
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance with regards to this hearing. This hearing is just to determine if his statement was freely, voluntarily, and knowingly made, not necessarily the contents of his statement and what changed this officer's mind one way or another. We're just talking about admissibility of the statement or suppression of the statement.
Judge, the state's argument throughout, or the state's questioning throughout this hearing has been effectively, Mr. Baker is a witness and therefore is not detained. And what I'm trying to establish now is at what point did Mr. Baker become a suspect and therefore in the officer's mind, detain, and them taking steps to ensure that Mr. Baker can't leave. That's my the direction I'm headed with this line of questioning.
But and I apologize, Your Honor, but the case law is very clear. This officer's subjective belief, one way or another, doesn't matter. It's what he thought, Matthew Baker thought. So whether this officer considered him prime suspect number one, public enemy of the state, or just innocent bystander or witness, it doesn't matter. It's what did Matthew Baker think.
I think you're combining two issues. What he thought and whether he was detained is the real issue. And what Mr. Baker felt or believed he was detained versus whether he is actually detained. He had to go out, that would appear to be detained. So I think you're crossing the argument. I think he can give his opinion as to when he crossed over, and he would have been detained if he was not already. At some point, the door was locked, from what I've heard. I'm not sure exactly when that was, but it wasn't communicated to Mr. Baker, and I don't know.
But, Your Honor, that was done after he'd already given his statement. The detective was very clear that that occurred.
He's got a written statement and he's got a verbal statement, right?
Yes, Your Honor, but what we saw, and I don't know if you recall from the first portion of the hearing that we did, Matthew Baker writes his statement, and it's not until he gets up to go to the door to hand out the statement, presumably because he's carrying the statement to the door. That's when he finds out that the door is locked. So his verbal statement to the detective, didn't know anything about the door, whether it was locked one way or another. It was clear it was unlocked because the detective was able to walk out of the room. And it's not until after he writes his statement that he even has any inkling that the door is locked, because he can't get out the door and he knocks on the door. And at that point, that is, we are right now at 15:17:04. He gets up and goes to the door, and this is already in evidence. At 15:56:24 is when he picked up the clipboard with the statement and tried to open the door. And it's clearly at that point is when he realized it was locked. So I guess my argument is, Judge, the case law is very clear. This officer's subjective belief one way or another doesn't play into it. It is what did this defendant believe? And clearly, he obviously thought the door was open. He obviously didn't think he was detained in any way at that point, because he was going to go out and into the hallway by virtue of him trying to open the door.
Well, I'm going to let him answer the question if we can, because I do believe the totality of the circumstances has to be considered. This is an argument they want to make without affecting the record. We never get this. I'm going to let him answer the question if he can. I think I know what his answer is based on prior testimony, not just today, but previously, but I'll give it a shot. Are you going to be playing some more video? If not, I can turn the light back on.
Judge, I do have some more video to ask questions about momentarily.
Go ahead, you can answer the question if you can. If you need to restate the question because you may have forgotten.
If she could restate that.
I will restate that question in one moment. I want to ask a different question first, because for the judge's benefit. At what point did you lock the door?
Upon exiting the room and closing the door, after I handed Mr. Baker the witness statement, the door was locked.
The door
I
was
locked
locked.
the door.
Okay. And that was before Mr. Baker finished writing out the statement. The door had been locked before that, right? Okay. Just want to make sure that the record is clear about what happened and when. Now, to rephrase my question, what specifically was it during Mr. Baker's verbal interview that moved him from being a witness to a suspect?
There was a statement that he made to me as far as his reasoning for going, what he felt or what he thought his reasoning for going back was what Mr. Cosby told him, that, for lack of a better term, were problematic to me. So are we talking about something again along the lines of, you thought you were going to pick somebody up, or are we now under the looking at you were going there with the impression to help them commit some level of a crime? So from there, again, without me being able to say, I can clearly say based off my knowledge and experience, whatever, this is my belief, why it fits for this. While he's writing his statement is when we had our meeting with our command staff to pull in for the information from the other witnesses that had been interviewed, from what we knew on scene to what we've been told from their experiences, again, from supervisors 20, 30 plus years from men dealing with these types of things, the decision was made based off his statements from Koski telling them, hey, look, everybody in the house is gonna get on the ground, everybody's gonna get it. From his own statement as far as in there, that he thought, you know, when they opened the door, they were gonna come out and fight. The decision from there was then made, all right, now we look like we have no problem calling to charge him as far as party for found to murder. Instead of now he is just a person of interest or witness that was with Koski at some point, during the night when they had information.
So if I'm correct, it was not until after you had that conversation with the other command staff that the decision was made, Mr. Baker is not a witness, he's a suspect, right?
Correct.
And that was after you had handed him the form,
Correct.
but before you would come back to get it, right?
I never.
Or not you, but someone had come back to get it, right?
Correct.
Okay. I'm gonna hit play on this video. It is there.
He's in.
Okay, so I have paused it. The timestamp is 15/17/38, right?
Right.
And that's you that walked back in, correct?
That is me.
And this is when you have in your hand the written statement form, right?
Statement form, yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
You know where we're at next number, that's gonna be nice. First interview is you, your address, email list, don't worry about social security number, date of birth here, if you have one for you, you can put it on there. You put your mother's phone number, whatever. In details is where I need you to tell the story. The details you can be, beginning to end. I'll come here, check on you here a little bit, if you need more paper, I'll break it.
So, from when we first got to the bonfire before any of this happened?
Right, yeah.
From,
No, from the beginning, like y'all said the other day, Koski was there to all, you know, however you ended up getting over there. Like a phone call that invited, whatever, start from that, to you saw him, so we ended up all the way back where we're at. I'll come back and check on you here in a minute.
Okay, so now, sir, the timestamp is 15/18/32, right?
Right.
And you have exited the room, right?
Right.
And closed the door behind you,
Right.
and we heard the lock click, right?
I believe there was a lot of clicking, but again, I know from remembering, upon exiting the room at this point, I did lock the door.
Whether we heard it or not, your testimony is, hey, that's the point where I locked the door,
Yes.
right? Okay. Now, I'm going to fast forward here to okay, so the timestamp is 17/15/08, correct?
Right.
Mr. Baker is standing up now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, Mr. Baker just tried the door right there, right?
Right.
And it was locked.
Correct.
And that was the second time Mr. Baker tried to open the door and it was locked, right?
I don't remember any time prior to that he attempted to open the door. I believe there was one other time when he tried to hand the statement off that he attempted to open it and the door was locked, but I don't remember how many times prior to this one specific moment.
Okay. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but to the best of your recollection, there was at least one prior
I
time.
believe there was one other time, as far as the statement before he tried to hand it off.
Yes, sir. Can I go to the bathroom? Yeah, give me 1 second.
Okay, so he has knocked on the door, right?
Right.
And he's asked to use the restroom, right?
Right.
Do you know who it is that answers the door?
That looks like Detective Mark DeVito.
DeVito? And he says just 1 second, right? Detective DeVito says just 1 second, right?
Correct.
Now I'm gonna, let's see. So the timestamp on this video now is 18 hours, 58 minutes, and 27 seconds, right?
Right.
We are talking just before 7 p.m., right?
Right.
And Mr. Baker is in the corner of the room, right?
I believe he is underneath that blanket behind the blue seat.
And this is several hours after you had completed your verbal interview with him, correct?
Correct.
So the timestamp now is 18 hours, 58 minutes, 47 seconds, and an officer is entering the room, right?
Yes.
Do you know who that officer is?
One with the sheriff's department.
Someone with the sheriff's department. Okay.
Yeah, there's kind of words.
Do you have anything about it? No, sir. Murders? I bet that's a lie. But, show the people. Whatever. Keep walking. Keep walking. Keep walking. Stop. Relax. Relax your lips. There you go. What's that?
Nothing.
Matthew what? Nick. You're under arrest for murder. What? You're under arrest for murder. What? I don't think that's murder.
Now, this officer has now placed Mr. Baker under formal arrest, right?
Correct.
And he said, Mr. Baker, you're under arrest for murder, right?
Correct.
And Mr. Baker says what? Is that
Correct.
correct? And the officer says, repeats that he's under arrest for murder, right?
Right.
And then the officer says, did I stutter? Is that correct? Or something to that effect?
Something to that effect.
Okay.
You slid, you mean you did sled, that's right. So over here, those leaves in the chair.
Actually, I was, close up and probably see that more detail of the steps. That I thought was coming. Of course, this is
Tony.
19.
Welcome to rest. They go left.
Nah, I didn't do it.
Now, detective, this officer says, or he asks Mr. Baker how old he is, correct?
Correct.
And he says to Mr. Baker, welcome to the rest of your life, right?
Correct.
Now, the timestamp here is 19 hours, 1 minute, and 14 seconds, right?
Right.
I go to court on Tuesday.
He stepped out, yeah. Y'all have residency rights, right? He does something, he doesn't know that. I think they interviewed around? Yeah, they interviewed, but he was at the right time, so. No, it was after. Alright, well, here, do me a favor. Why do we shut the hell up?
Now, what just occurred there, officer, please correct me if I am wrong, but the officer from the sheriff's department that is placing Mr. Baker under formal arrest asks the other officers at the door whether or not Mr. Baker had been read his rights, correct?
That's what it sounded like, yes.
And they say that he had been interviewed,
Right.
and so they assume that his rights had been read to him, correct?
I didn't hear it say as far as an assuming, I believe it said that he would interview it. I don't know to that extent. That was the gentleman's voice, if the Texas voice confirmed that if I remember the voice correctly, was Sergeant Bender.
Okay.
Sergeant Bender was not directly involved with the actual investigation process. We still had aspects of CID that were unattached to this in case something else happened, so we didn't have everybody tied up. So Sergeant Bender had no knowledge of what had transpired prior to that. He just knew what we were investigating.
So let me make sure that I summarize correctly. The arresting sheriff, the sheriff's deputy, asks whether or not Mr. Baker had been read his Miranda rights, and the response was that Mr. Baker had been interviewed. Is that right?
That is right.
And then the officer who is arresting Mr. Baker says, do me a favor, and pardon my language, Judge, while you're with me, shut the hell up, right?
Right.
This is the first time that any officer had asked whether or not Mr. Baker's rights had been read, correct?
Correct.
May I approach, Judge?
Certainly. You want to turn the lights back on?
Yes, Judge, I believe we can turn the lights back on. Thank you.
Yeah, I get the right switch.
And, Judge, I apologize. May I approach?
Sure.
Hey, I'm showing you it's been previously admitted as State's Exhibit number 4. And you recognize that document as Mr. Baker's written statement, correct?
That's correct.
This is before we filled out State's Defendant's Exhibit number 3.
Judge, may I approach again?
Sure.
I'm going to show you what has been marked for identification purposes as Defendant's Exhibit number 3. I'm going to hand that document to you.
Okay.
Sir, do you recognize that document?
I do.
And what is that document?
This is a written statement form from Matthew Baker.
does that appear to be a true and accurate copy of the written statement provided to you by Mr. Baker? Or provided to law enforcement by Mr. Baker?
The statement itself, there are sections as far as for our records purposes that are filled out on this form that are not on this form.
Judge, at this time, I move to...
Which is this and which is not this.
I'm sorry. On the form that the defense has listed as Exhibit 3, the top of the form has a slot for our case number, for our investigative case number. In the defense Exhibit 3, that case number is filled out. In the bottom section, there it says for departmental use only, where it has listed as victim, witness, suspect, other, for a box to be checked. There's also a spot where it says date, time, statement, and date and time, statement taken, interview began, completed, the signature as far as who was interviewed by, and their ID number. Again, in the defense Exhibit 3, that section is marked and filled out. On page 2, there is a section for the case number, and it lists an empty spot for page blank, however many corresponding pages. Page 2 is listed as page 2 of 3. Page 3 has the same case number slot for the case number, which is filled out, and then the page is set for page 3 of 3. Again, those sections that are filled out that I just identified as Defense Exhibit 3 are not filled out on what's listed as State's Exhibit 4.
Judge, at this time, I move to admit Defense Exhibit number 3.
No objection.
Three will be admitted.
And now, Detective, I just want to ask you a few questions about the differences between those two documents. In Defense Exhibit number 3, at the bottom of page 1, there's a section marked for departmental use only, correct?
Correct.
And there is a section for whether or not the person being writing the statement is a victim, a witness, a suspect, or other, right?
Right.
And in Defense Exhibit 3, the box for suspect is marked on this, correct?
Correct.
And that would indicate that Mr. Baker is a suspect.
Correct.
And the date, time, statement taken, interview began, it has December 27th, 2016, right? 12.
It does. It does as well. It does.
Now, is that date correct?
That is not correct. It was October 27th of 2016, not December.
Yeah. And that would have been the same for the line marked completed. It says December 27th, but the actual date would have been October 27th, correct? And the statement taken, interviewed by, that's your name, right?
That is my name, yes.
And that's your badge number.
That is my badge number.
Okay. And the case number at the top, that's your internal department case number, correct?
That was for our record and charging documents. That is our case report for this incident, where all documentation that is listed to that can be linked back to that case number.
So that's not the clerk of court case number or the indictment number, that's your internal police department number,
That is
right?
the Henry County Police Department incident number.
Okay. Now, is it part of your routine responsibilities as a detective to prepare press releases in major cases?
At times.
At
It can
times.
be the detective or the case sergeant or the lieutenant or the captain, or normally it stops as far as the captain. The major will fill those out. But yes, it has been my job with certain cases to fill them out before.
That's not entirely unusual that you would do that, right? It happens.
It normally takes for more noteworthy cases, but yes, it's not entirely unusual.
Defense Exhibit 4, press release. May I approach, Your Honor? I am showing you what has been marked for identification purposes as Defense Exhibit number 4. Can you please take a look at that document and tell me if you recognize it?
Is the media release reference to the homicide incident, the address on Moxon Gap Road.
And that's this case, correct?
It is.
And were you the one that prepared this?
I was.
And in this press release, there's a narrative. I apologize, Your Honor. That I will move to admit defense exhibit number 4.
Yes, Your Honor, there is an objection with regards to relevance. The press release, it has nothing to do with whether or not the defendant freely, voluntarily, and knowingly gave his statement. This is a press release that presumably he didn't know anything about. And so it has no bearing on whether or not he gave this statement to the officer freely, voluntarily, knowingly, without threat of injury or promise of benefit. It has no relevance to this issue.
The argument on the other side would be
That, Judge, it lists a specific time after which Mr. Baker was detained.
it's a press release, and that's going to be who filled it out. I mean, I've never seen it, so I don't know.
Judge, if I may approach the bench, I can give the court a copy of the press release so the court can know what we're talking about. Here you are, Your Honor. And so, Judge, what I would say is that Detective McCoy just testified that he is the one that prepared the press release. And in the press release, because it hasn't been admitted, I'm a little hesitant to go too much into detail, but the press release lists a specific time that individual suspects, including Mr. Baker, were detained in this case. It is very relevant to whether or not Mr. Baker was detained and whether he was free to go.
This was prepared by Detective Moore, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Can't hear you, Judge.
That's, can't hear me?
No, sir.
I'll back away from my. All right, well, let me ask a couple of questions. There's, I can see, I don't see a date that this was prepared. I see a 12/08, I don't know if that's December 08, the bottom left, or when it was released.
The 12/08 that you see is only departmental number. It's like the department number as far as with this form. It's not an extra date.
Do you see a date anywhere on here where the date is released?
We have the date of the incident, and as far as the date of the incident with the narrative, the date of the arrests. There's not a specific date listed in here as far as when this media release was released. And I do not remember off the top of my head what day it was actually released.
So, but your argument is that McCarl's, and I'm assuming, said 1,000 hours, which I don't know if that refers to 10-hour clock.
It does, sir. It's 1,000 hours, which would be 10 o'clock in the morning.
Those suspects plus an additional 3 persons had been detained and were being questioned. I suppose in current language would say that both persons of interest at some point to a suspect.
Yes, sir.
And you don't believe it's relevant on the state's behalf because it's all in what Mr. Baker had in his head, in his mind, as to whether he was a suspect or this individual.
Right, Your Honor, with regards to any statement that he's given, in order for the court to make that determination, it's not the subjective belief of the police or anyone else. It's what a reasonable person would believe in Mr. Baker's situation. And given everything else that we have, the state's contention is that it was clear he was not in custody, and certainly a press release that was created by a detective after the fact, going back and looking at things, certainly doesn't give any indication as to what a reasonable person in this situation, in Mr. Baker's situation, would believe. And so the state's contention is that that is not relevant. It has nothing to do with whether or not his statement was made freely, voluntarily, knowingly.
Well, that addresses only the detention issue, whether or not he was in custody. Mr. Baker's state of mind or belief at that time had to do with the detention issue. If he's a suspect, if he would not think he's a suspect, obviously that's not the issue for him, but what he believes he is or is not. I suppose if you read him right, he might feel more like a suspect, but I think that it would be better to have this admitted. I think that you have at least an argument that can be made, and I'm pretty sure, I've never been a police officer in my entire life, and I'll have an opportunity in the future to be one after I told people. And I'm sure that when you want to look at your review at the end of the year, if you want to have cases solved, timely, make yourself look good. I don't know. But this is, these four will be admitted over objection. You can have my
Thank you, Judge. May I approach?
Yes.
Now, Detective LaCroix, this press release was written sometime after Mr. Baker was formally arrested, right?
Yes.
And in this press release, it says by 1000 hours, which would be 10 a.m., both suspects plus an additional 3 persons had been detained and were being questioned. That's in the press release, correct?
Correct.
And it goes on to say, after interviewing the 2 suspects, Jacob Koski and Matthew Baker, they were arrested and charged with 3 counts of homicide, along with additional crimes, correct?
Correct.
So, in the media release, you list 10 a.m. as the time after which Mr. Baker, at the time at which Mr. Baker was detained, right?
Correct. In the meeting.
In the press release. If I may have just one moment. I just have 1 or 2 questions. At the time that you interviewed Mr. Baker at the driveway of 3300 Highway 81, at that point, the only information that you had was that there were 2 people that had been in the house, right?
From the witness who was in the bedroom saying that he saw 2 people after the shots subsided coming down the hallway, checking rooms. Yes.
And at that point, Jacob Koski's half-sister had been interviewed, right?
Correct.
And she didn't say that Mr. Baker was the other person in the house, right?
What was relayed to me was her term was if I had to guess who the other person would have been, my brother would have been Matt Baker. But
Okay.
I was never given any explanation on why she picked that name.
Okay. If she had to guess, it would have been Matt Baker, right?
Correct. That was how it was worded to me.
And then no additional information beyond how or about how she got to that conclusion, right?
Correct.
And then when you interview Mr. Baker at the police station, by that point, you yourself had spoken with Mr. Koski.
Correct.
And Mr. Koski says that Mr. Baker was the other person in the house with him, right?
Correct.
So by the time you have that second police station interview with Mr. Baker, at that point you have Jude's statement saying, if I had to guess, it would have been Mr. Baker. And then you have Jacob Koski saying, it was Mr. Baker in the house with me, right?
Right.
if I could just have one minute. Judge, I don't have any further cross-examination at this point, and if we could just take maybe just 2 moments. I don't know whether Ms. Venuto is going to need to use the AV equipment. If she does, I just want to take a second to go ahead and get that set up. So if we could have just 2 minutes, Judge?
Fine, I'll stay right here.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you, Judge.
Right back.
Judge, Ms. Galloway is asking for
We're not on the record.
Oh. When she comes back, I'm gonna ask for a small action. Okay. If that's okay?
That's okay not to be on the record.
Okay, okay. And, one for us and one for Mr. Baker, Judge.
That's fine with me.
Okay.
I'm still not going anywhere.
All right, thank you.
Right here.
I'm going to do what you're getting set up. It's about 4:30. How much you have on the cross. I think we could probably end the day with Detective McCoy, and then tomorrow do our witness, and then anyone else, my witness, anyone else that you've got, depending on who's going Oh, okay. It may go. Again, I was just worried about making sure that we weren't going to be in a situation where I had to try and get someone in a rush to me here. Okay. No, you know. I'm going to do that real quick.
Yeah, I would expect that to be the case.
You got the extra bucks.
They want to put something on the record.
That was because they wanted the bathroom break.
Oh.
The bathroom break had to be on the record.
Judge, since we're not, I know we're not on the record, but Ms. Galloway's, how late are we going today? I think we're gonna go past 5, so I'm just trying to plan for tomorrow. Are we gonna stop at 5? Are we gonna go till 6? Are we?
Well, I've got a meeting at 6:30 tonight, but it wouldn't hurt my feelings if I didn't make it. I have to send an email and let her know that's not essential to it. I responded to it was coming or not coming, and I think they think it's coming. So I don't ever respond to this meeting. We're doing a 20th anniversary celebration, starting with the church.
Oh.
If I was one of the founders, they won't be there. Almost in.
Or imagine if you, yeah. How late do you think we're gonna go? Do I need to call my pet sitter?
I don't know, she didn't say how much she needed to go, but at 5. I said, what I needed to do is stay here long as I can do the meeting at 6:30.
I'm here.
How long do you think we might go?
My guess is maybe 5:36.
You need a Yes, sir.
Yeah. I'm just gonna step right back here with my phone and call them. Okay.
But just to throw it out there, Mr. Studowski and I are both Atlanta residents, and today is an election day. So if there is any way that we would be able to be done in time for Mr. Studowski and I to. Judge, I have been sick, which have prevented me from being able to do that, Judge. Normally I would.
I know you had no teeth, but I heard. I'm here till midnight anyway, sir. Yeah. I'm on my normal shift now anyway. Considering the fact that I got a 1-year-old, I'll be awake. Yes, I'd be awake. I'd be awful tired, but I'd be awake.
Yeah. Warm it up,
We're to the point now where me, for the most part, he sleeps throughout the night without much of a problem. He just, he was calling, he has a reflex, he wouldn't give me anything, so he'll move me to sleep in a recliner like this. So that's where we're at now, too. He's starting to break himself up a little bit, and he hates that pretty much. But he'll sleep on me throughout the night. Once I get to sleep, I can sleep. It's good. My wife has a little bit of issue because he can still smell food on her, so every now and then he'll wake up and start pulling the shirts and everything.
It's the same.
Yes, I wait, it's right here. I didn't really have to move.
Judgment reapproach?
Yes.
Oh, not that way.
Sorry. Yeah, I did that too earlier.
He told me he's gonna be up with me.
That's true.
Turn out here at 5 o'clock. I'm fine.
Wednesday is not a day for me. That's what I work, just like today, I work till midnight.
I felt like this week we would be here too. We would have you here too long tomorrow, but.
Start at 10.
We're not gonna do that, sir.
Well, it's already done. So that's fine. I'm not gonna call them back and call them off.
Did you say it was a pet sitter?
My pet sitter, yeah. I just wanted to make sure that they would be let out. Yeah.
My cats just wait for me to come home and then they take it
Well, I
out
know
of
that
me.
for mom, she's, thank you. It's no problem to walk next door.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We're gonna stop at 5.
Okay,
So you're gonna have to go to your meeting now.
I apologize for that, Judge.
I'm gonna call them and tell them you're free.
I wouldn't lie to my pastor. That'd be a good plan.
Of all people.
I mean, really.
Yeah, of all people, that's probably not the one we tell stories to.
Will Judge Ott be there? Judge Ott.
Oh, no, different church.
Oh, I thought this, so is it different?
That was our first preacher when we started this church.
First one, I got you.
This church.
I got you.
So we've got a Methodist in
Yeah. I grew up Methodist, so I do know that.
First female pastor. Practiced that. Pastor and preacher.
She what?
He does both of them. Some people. Pastor, some preachers.
Have me sit there.
He's got both. He's got both. Okay, are y'all ready? Let's start now. We're gonna get out here at 5 o'clock, we can finish them up tomorrow morning. Read your record.
Thank you, Judge. So, Crying, let's talk a little bit about when you were speaking with Miss Lanier. Defense fund. Let's go to that. playing, this is State's Exhibit 2, which was the previously admitted interview from speaking to Miss Lanier in the driveway.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
This was the audio with it or not? It showed that it's running, we don't hear anything.
No, I don't hear anything. Let's see. No, that would be why. Let's try that again. And I think you spoke to, when you were speaking with the defense counsel and testifying there on cross, you talked about that a lot of your conversation with her initially started about Jacob Koski and knowing him and that sort of thing. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, I'm going to fast forward to the part where you started talking to her and to Mr. Koski, Mr. Baker in the driveway about them possibly coming down and testifying or being interviewed.
Yeah, that's what they told.
Let's go to going into, do you remember Miss Lanier complaining to you about another officer that she felt was rude?
She did.
Okay. And after that, let's talk a little bit.
All it is, so you have no concern. All this is because, number one, that he's friends with Jacob, apparently.
No, he's not friends with Jacob. No.
Or Cost, or he knows Cost.
Okay. And in the background, when he says, no, I'm not, is that Matthew Baker in the background?
It is.
So, okay. So as you were speaking to Miss Lanier in the driveway, Matthew Baker had walked up and he was standing close enough to you. Was he standing close enough to you so that he could hear and actually interject himself in your conversation with Miss Lanier?
Yes.
Okay. During your conversation with Miss Lanier, did Mr. Baker walk away or did he stay from this point on, once he's there, did he generally stay in that same area until the end of your conversation with her?
My recollection is that he stayed in that general area. He did not walk off.
He knows Koski and the other girls, and then this Jacob talking about that they saw him earlier this evening. All we're doing is a formal interview so we can get our questions we need answered, and then we will make sure we will get them that.
Okay, so y'all want to go back. Okay, cool. I'm sorry, I'm not here to.
Judge, can you hear that?
Not the last part.
Okay, I don't know why it's all of a sudden gotten quiet. I have 1 moment to see what is going on. I'm going to back it up a little bit, Judge, and see if I can get it to play any louder.
Or Koski, or he knows Koski. He knows Koski and the other girls, and then this Jacob talking about that they saw him earlier this evening. All we're doing is a formal interview so we can get our questions we need answered, and then we will make sure we will get them that.
Okay, so y'all want to go back. Okay, cool. I'm sorry. I'm not being serious about it, but I
And so who was that who was saying, asking if they were all going to the same place? Is that still Matthew Baker?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. So when defense counsel was saying to you earlier that you didn't actually address Matthew Baker as you were speaking to Miss Lanier, now that you hear that, that's actually incorrect. Is that right? You were speaking to Miss Lanier and also to Mr. Baker.
Correct.
Well, I mean, that's the thing, but we get dropped off here and then whatever.
And who is it that says, and that's it?
That's Miss Lanier. And she's making it, making it known sort of bring back that the people that were with Mr. Baker in the driveway were the ones that come back to her house. And
Now,
that's it.
Before she said that, did you also hear Matthew Baker say that's it? Or can you not hear that on there?
I couldn't really make it out on that one, because I don't know where all of a sudden it started getting super quiet. It hadn't done that before.
Okay. But now that you hear this again, do you recognize that as you were speaking to Miss Lanier, you were also speaking to Mr. Baker?
Yes.
So when you communicated that the idea was that once the interviews were done, that everyone would be transported back there, when you were saying that to Miss Lanier, were you also saying that to Mr. Baker?
He was within shot as far as where he would clearly hear what the intention was.
Right? And during that part of your conversation with Miss Lanier, was Mr. Baker in and out and interjecting himself into that conversation, becoming the third party in that discussion?
He was.
Now, when someone is interviewed as a witness in a case, I think you testified earlier that it is standard to keep them separate. Does that matter whether they are witness, witness, suspect, or victim in a case? Do you always want to keep people separate?
That is our standard operating procedure as far as training with people. When we come up with any scene, there's multiple people that are involved or might have information that we need to separate them.
Okay. And why do you keep them separate?
It is a preservation of information, correct information, not tainted information, to where people start talking, getting their stories together. You're getting this person's statement, this person, what they witnessed, not a possible group statement for people who've been able to sit around with each other and kind of get your story situated.
Okay, when you say get their story situated, do you necessarily mean as if they're all lying, or just you don't want to have one person influence another person's
You want to have one person influence someone else, because you may have situations where everyone saw different parts of an incident, and they're sitting there talking about it, and they didn't see it, but someone else did, and they hear that person say they said it, that they saw it, and that can interject itself into their statement, even though they didn't say it. It's more of a, okay, this person saw it, I must have saw it type of thing. Whether they're lying, trying to hide stuff, omit stuff, or it's just, again, you have people that have different perceptions when they hear someone else's perception. Well, I must have saw that too, and then you get that instead of what they actually saw.
And does that apply whether or not the person is a suspect or a witness in a case?
No.
With regards to making arrangements to drive them home, at that point, in the middle of a triple, what would turn out to be a quadruple homicide, at that point, had you already made arrangements specifically for who would drive these folks home?
I think it was the officers and detectives that were on the scene. Whoever was going to be would be the ones as far as the transport. We had, because of Ms. Head statement that she had driven the car in murder, the Jeep was no longer in play for them to be able to get in as far as the driver, because she is now letting me know that there was a person who committed murder that was in her vehicle. So that was now going to end up having to get a search warrant done for that. Mr. Baker did not have a driver's license. From what I remember, Ms. Lanier had other items which she had to go take care of. So from there, our quickest option to get this taken care of was from officers and detectives that were on scene to do the transporting. I don't remember anything as far as being a specific one, like detective so-and-so taking them, officer so-and-so taking them. They were there, they got situated between the officers over there that would do the transporting, and then went from there.
Okay. And is that something that is commonly done in cases where you have multiple witnesses coming to the police department? do you all routinely give them a ride there and give them a ride home after they have given their statement?
Yes, I've done it several times as far as a detective. I've done it a couple of times now, even now back as a uniform patrol as a sergeant.
Okay, so that transporting, that giving them a ride to the police department and then back home, did that have anything to do with whether or not you thought anyone was a suspect in the case?
No.
And in fact, in Miss Lanier's statement that we just heard, do you recall she was talking about her daughter, she had to get her daughter to her doctor's appointment?
Correct.
Okay. And so when you said earlier that she was not going to be able to drive them, was that because of that?
Correct.
And so at that point, at the driveway, when you were saying we'll get somebody to drive them home, you didn't have a specific officer in mind, is that fair to say?
That's correct.
Okay, but you knew that based on experience and based on the number of officers that you had there, was it your intention and was it a possibility and a practical thing to do to say, we will get someone to drive them home?
I'd get them home one or the other.
Okay. All right, let's talk about I'm going to show you what's been admitted as State's Exhibit 3. Bear with me. Let's go back Yeah, I may have one moment. The player is not working and I want to check my notes to see which player I need to play this on.
If it's through our interview room, it runs to video player first, then super player.
That's
it should play through.
Trying to find my notes on. Thank you.
Right there. And super player should. And there. There.
Let's talk a little bit about the way that the interview room is set up. Defense counsel asked you about moving the table off to the side. And we don't see it on the video, but is that you that came in and moved the table? Okay. And when defense counsel was asking you about the door, the situation with the door, let's go back to I want to pause it here. This is in that same time frame that defense counsel was asking you about with regards to when the two of you are in the room. Just to be clear, and so that we're clear on the record, you're not in any way blocking the door, are you?
No.
Okay. In fact, who is closer to the door, you or Matthew Baker?
Matthew Baker.
Okay. Does Matthew Baker have a clear path between himself and the door?
He does.
Okay. So when defense counsel says that in the line that we see on the video, it's Matthew Baker, you, and then the door, just to be very clear, you're in the forefront of the video, correct?
The camera's directly behind my shoulder, so yes, as far as in the forefront where I'm positioning, from the corner of the door where the door handle is at, I'm about midway back up the wall, like away from the door.
Okay. And so, is there any part of your body that is blocking the door?
No.
Is there any part of your body that is even, well, I don't know, you're tall, but is any part of your body even within arm's reach of the door?
I lean forward maybe, but no.
Is there anything else that is blocking Matthew Baker in that room?
No.
And at this time, at 14:52:04, when the two of you are sitting there talking and had been talking for a few minutes in that room, was that door locked?
No.
Did you give any indication to Matthew Baker that that door was locked?
No.
Did you tell him that he was in any way being detained or in custody in any way, shape, or form?
No. I actually told him to get the moment that he wasn't being charged. Just looking as far as for information.
At that time, when you went to bring Matthew Baker into the room, into this interview room with you, where had he been?
I believe he was in our roll call room, which is a large open room normally where we conduct roll call for uniform patrol shifts prior to they go onto the road. It is, I said, it's an open room. There are two doorways, one to the side, one as far as behind, but the doorways are open doorways, and there is no door, there is no lock as far as from there.
And then when you were in this room with him, were you, let's back it up a little bit. Were you wearing your gun?
I was not.
So let's go back to right around 14:45 and about 38 seconds or so. Okay, you see yourself standing there?
I do.
And just to be clear, are you wearing your gun?
I am not.
And is Matthew Baker cuffed?
He is not.
Okay, did Matthew Baker, as he came in and sat down, does he appear to be relaxed?
Due to the situation, yes.
Let's talk about now, once you sit down here,
the leaders with the music, so the people who come with the TV. One person said about business, stuff that's going on that happened over in.
Let's talk a little bit about why you sit in the position that you sit in versus why you have Matthew Baker sitting in that position. Let's talk about the chairs. Is that typically where someone who's being interviewed and videoed during the interview, is that typically where you would ask them to sit?
Yes.
Okay, and why is that?
It places them again as far as in front of the actual video system, or to the cameras directly as far as on them. It also provides where the microphone system as far as that within the roof system, it provides them a little bit as far as the distance to where normally their statements to us are clearer, easier to pick up. It also again provides, let's say in a similar situation, I have a suspect or a witness, a victim, confidential informant, whatever. And they just, they're providing the information and they decide that they need to draw a raised board what they're talking about. Again, it also puts that camera there to where it's also video representation as far as whatever evidence is provided on that board. There's numerous different reasons as far as why we place them as far as in that location. Again, the idea is to have the camera on them, because even from our aspect of whether it be victim, witness, suspect, as far as whoever we go back and watch these, there might be things that we miss that we can pick up on and reviewing it at a later time.
Talk a little bit about.
I can get this involved Kowski and all the other bits. Like I say, the numbers not being told us anything. We're just trying to get information. All right.
So you told him, you let him know that he was not being charged with anything?
No, just looking for information, yes.
At any point when you were in that interview with him, in that interview room, did you ever say to him, we're going to charge you with something?
No.
Did you ever tell him that he couldn't leave the interview room?
No.
Did you ever give him any indication that he was going to be arrested?
No.
Did you ever give him any indication that he was currently either detained or arrested or a suspect?
No.
What do you do with him?
Matthew Baker Jr.
Okay, no.
Yes, sir.
Okay. What was your number?
10997.
Okay. You have a phone number?
Yes, sir. No, mom's cell phone.
Okay, what's your?
This portion of the video, when you're getting biographical information, is that pretty standard in interviews, or is that something that is specific that you only do when someone is a suspect or being detained?
No, that's standard, so we identify who we're talking to.
Number 678. 94. 9905.
Okay, and your address?
3300. 81.
Okay. Alright, I'm just back over and just cut straight to the chase, because we've been sitting here quite some time. We've been here quite a while, so we're not wasting time with this. I need to be honest with you, though, if you saw what you know, because I already know. I know that you didn't have a gun in your hand, you didn't pull a trigger on anybody. I know that.
Okay.
I know you were in the house when it happened. I know you did it. And what happened afterwards?
Detective Sergeant LaCroix, as you're laying out this portion of it for Mr. Baker and letting him know these things that you know or that you believe that you know, is that something that's pretty standard when you're interviewing a witness or a suspect or anyone?
With my interview technique, it is when dealing with situations like this, kind of let people out. Like this is an idea about stuff I already know. So we need to kind of go along the lines. If you have any information that goes another direction or provides what or cooperates this is where I'm tracking. So you know where my head's at. Let me know what's going on.
Okay. And so this part of the discussion, is this in any way on your part meant to indicate that you are thinking of him as a suspect in any way?
No.
Is this in any way meant to indicate on your part that you are detaining him in any way?
No.
And during the course of your conversation with him, during all of this, did he seem to believe, based on your observations, that he was a suspect?
Objection, Judge. This is speculation. I think that this officer can testify about what he saw, what he said, but he cannot talk about what or whether Mr. Baker believed that he was free to leave. When this veers too far into reading someone's mind or trying to testify about someone's internal mental state. I have no objection to him testifying about what Matt said, about what Matt did, about what he said, but he can't testify about how Matt felt, or whether Matt felt like he was free to go, or whether Matt felt like he was detained. That's my objection, Judge.
And Your Honor, I asked him, based on your observations of him, was there anything that he observed that indicated that Mr. Baker said he felt like he was a suspect, seemed fearful in any way, anything that this officer saw and observed in any way that gave him that indication?
Well, I'll let him answer the question for what he saw or observed that indicated to him that he felt like he was, what did you say, a suspect or detained?
Detained in any way that he felt like, anything that he observed during the course of his interaction with Mr. Baker.
That question will be the last one today. Then we're going to go home.
Okay, thank you, Judge.
No, when I was speaking with him, he was very attentive, listening, like trying to make sure he understood what I was, what I was laying out, what I was talking about as far as what I needed. There was no, what I could see was like, he was considering like apprehension or anything along those lines. He was very attentive, alert, and responsive to what I was telling him.
All right, we'll come back tomorrow. And did you ever hear from your other witness? Or lawyer, or whatever way you're looking for somebody tomorrow about your other case?
Yes, Judge. Actually, as we just sat down, I did get a text from defense counsel. If I can bear with me one moment. It does not look like we're doing this plea tomorrow now, Judge.
We'll plan on starting at 10 anyway. All right? If you don't want to, wherever you want to leave, you can, because we're going to lock the courtroom and we'll not have to clean. Keep anybody from coming in. I don't have to throw all this stuff back up. Not me personally, I don't do that. If you're going to exit today, because it is after 5 o'clock, the basement exit is your best bet to get out without setting off the alarm. That's the way I like to get there, the elevator, and all the way down to the basement, take a left, take a left. You can use the stairs. If you'll just climb around the stairs, you can't go any lower, then you'll find your way to the exit. And also wear your mask while you're there. We'll see you tomorrow at 10 a.m.
Yes, sir.
You're gonna leave all this right here?
Yes, ma'am.
It will be locked and these are what we're entered today.
I'm going to take this out so that this goes in.
So all of these. Okay.
All right. We'll see you tomorrow.
Okay, we're gonna leave this right here. Okay.
Oh, I'm thinking this case. Oh my God. Yes, no. I just said you. Yeah, I'm gonna call him.
We're gonna, all of this is still living room
Really?
here, right?
Yeah, I'm not touching any of
I
that.
mean, if it's nothing to have, but he can tell me.
Okay, that would be, don't worry about it.
Oh, yeah, my man.
I'm just thinking while you were down there.
Yeah.
You guys busy?
You bring them back tomorrow, man?
No, sir, I'm gonna be at the range sergeant shopping.
Could you just let them know not to stop? Or you have to wait on the thing?
We'll be here. Closing on.
All right, appreciate it. Thanks, Phelps.
No problem.
I'll make sure.
Bye, Miles. See you tomorrow, okay?
I'm just hanging out with them. Can we hear from him?
I'm gonna pack up. You need to get out faster.
No, not out.
You turn to Rock Hills.
I can do that.
476, 455, 456.
Oh, that's normal.
Yes, sir. Oh, you're gone.
Stick around for
I
us.
see.
Well.
I see you switched out of shoes about 10 minutes ago.
Oh, okay.
I saw that little cool switch.
Yeah, did you? You did?
Yeah.
I'm paying attention.
I pay attention to everything my clothes.
I'm paying attention. Right.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Okay, all right, okay, all right. Yes. Okay, all right, okay.
Christina, can you take your water?
Yeah.
You need it.
Y'all have a good day.
Yeah,
You drive safe.
That's how you're gonna get better too. I did. See ya tomorrow. What is 10, right? 10.
Yeah. But I'll be in there about 9:30.
Okay.
If y'all wanna come early. Hey, you got the key. You do. Yeah. Take your time, you gotta
I'll
rush.
get up. No,
Take your
no,
time.
it's done. I'm just gonna pack it all up. Yeah, I just wanna make sure.
This is gonna stay here, right?
That is all staying here, yeah.
Okay.
I don't wanna mess with that.
Do you want to do a timeout?
It seems to time out on its own.
That's a really good question.
And this stuff right here is what now, Mr. Wood?
They are leaving that there, it just
Okay.
stays right there.
Okay, all right, okay.
Yeah.
What I'll do is I'll just make sure that the person that's here don't let anybody come in here.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'm skip
I'm
now
gonna
that
leave
we were done. I think I
this
looked
stuff
up now.
here, I just have to take this home,
Okay,
Oh,
but I'm gonna leave the rest of that stuff there.
okay.
So you're leaving the exhibits there? You're,
I can actually, you know what, let's move them over here, just so they don't get accidentally knocked off or something. Thank you.
Okay,
okay.
We're just gonna set them right here.
okay.
Thank you.
Sure, I should leave the lights on so they can stay warmed up. See, it got a little brighter in here as the time went on.
It did.
So I think what it is, those lights are just like temperamental. They're not used to being on a lot, so makes it a little warmed up.
I don't know, can you do something about the heat?
I think
My
we will.
little fingers are
No,
doing
no,
sorry.
we're gonna do a bump on it tomorrow. I told Mike today was his day. He had a little cooler there. I told him we're gonna bump that up.
Now, I'm gonna,
Not too bad.
I'm gonna dress warmer tomorrow, and then if I die of the heat, I'm gonna yell at you.
No. We're not gonna have it like that, but we're gonna have it a little more comfortable than this.
I might wear gloves.
No, it won't be that. It won't be that. Were you cold? What?
Come.
You was cold. Yeah, I was cold too. That's why I kept doing this. Yeah.
Cold? Are you cold?
I'm freezing.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're
My
gonna
drawers
do.
are cold. Tomorrow I'm wearing boots to keep my toes.
Yeah, we'll do a bump on it. I'll pump it up tomorrow.
Okay. Oh, well then maybe I won't. Here's on about the heat.
I'm not gonna bump it up like that.
I sweat.
Yeah.
I was the y'all before 10, I'm sure, but
Okay.
around there.
All right. You guys say.
Okay.
Okay.
So I let IT know that we were done.
Okay.
So I don't know if they have to come in and do anything with that. I guess it just turns itself off, but I don't know. Nobody wants me messing with that, trust me.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm gonna leave it be too, and they come in here and do something they got access to, they can come in here and get it.
Okay.
But I don't like messing with this type of stuff like this either,
Same.
because if they don't work tomorrow, then they're gonna be like, huh?
What'd you do?
Yep. All right, have a good one.